Hi, I'm Jason Siaglo. A few days ago have passed since we had the final Shoreline Symposium focused on artificial intelligence and machine learning. I've had a few days to reflect, and it was striking the comparison to this symposium versus the first one that was led by Rob Whiteman 2.5 years ago. During that discussion with a handful of people, very few people had any idea what Rob was talking about. Most people were frankly shocked by what he was telling them as far as what was coming down the pipe with artificial intelligence, the implications for society, careers, jobs, and people left, myself included, just walking away a little bit more in shock than anything else. Fast forward 2.5 years later, totally different. The people in the room were fully engaged. Many were avid users of artificial intelligence. They had very thoughtful questions, deep questions. We're really trying to grapple with the implications: business, career, kids, education. And one comment really stuck with me was from my friend Greg, who talked about his son who was interviewing for jobs. And a year ago, during all his job interviews, artificial intelligence did not come up one time. But this year, it came up in every single interview. I think he said his son went through about 12 plus interviews, and every time they wanted to dig in and understand his expertise and experience with artificial intelligence. That really shook his son, who now realizes how important this is going to be for him, his career, his development. I think what I tried to do is take this, it was a very long discussion, and I tried to cut out what I could, but keep the essence of the discussion, the questions, and Rob's views, observations, and really his take on where we are. I think one of the big takeaways is there's a lot of people talking about artificial intelligence, and you're going to read a lot, have a lot of opinions. But if you've ever really wanted to dig deep, and one of the world experts who's been studying this and working with this for 12 years, the next 90 minutes is a fantastic use of your time. And my guess is if you really engage, turn off your phone distractions and listen and think, you will walk away with the realization that this is something that's happening that it's very hard to understand the magnitude of. Rob sent me the some surveys, some charts, some articles, essays he spoke about, so I'll include those in the links in the YouTube page. And as a reminder, this is for conversational purposes, educational purposes only. It's not considered investment advice, legal advice, or tax advice. But I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Those of you that don't know, I started this about 2.5 years ago. It was just really no real strategy, just bring together thoughtful people, talk about life, work, purpose, and just learn from one another. All of us have been building careers, raising families, accumulating experiences, and many people are just, what's next? I was going through what I call halftime, Bob Buford's halftime book, or Falling Upward by Richard Rohr, and I realized there's a lot of other people, maybe different scenarios, but asking the similar questions. So this is how it started. Most of you know the story. 3 years ago, almost to the day, I quit my job, and like Aaron, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life, no clear plan. It was a roller coaster. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but it was about 2 years ago, Rob and I were hiking the Camino de Santiago and started to get more clarity. So the uncertainty started to drift away, started to get more clarity on what I wanted the second half to be. And it was actually last week, a lot of you guys know, I was taking my kids fishing up in Canada, and when you're on a boat, you're sitting there in the middle of the lake, and there's a lot of time to think. And there's a couple insights really hit. One is the first half is more about responsibility, accumulation, a lot of what we're still talking about today here, career, family, achievement, all that stuff. But the second half has, at least for me, and ironically, given what we're talking about today, has been way more about elimination. It's actually funny listening about I'm actually focused way more about wiping things away and clarity and focus. How do I want to spend my time? Who do I want to spend my time with? Family, faith. I got really close to my Catholic faith, writing, publishing, and health, and then also connecting people. Just getting people together that I really admire, learn from, and just talking with no objective, no goal, which is kind of one of the reasons why we're here today and why I'm just fascinated just listening to people talk about their experiences, because you brought up a lot of things I never would have thought about ever. And I think what you did hit on, which is I had no idea AI would become such a central part of what I call my second half. Just listening to these conversations. It has helped me in so many ways. And I won't go into it because Rob told me earlier he wants to change the format, so I'm going to have to talk a little bit later. Unfortunately, I thought I was done. The reason why I'm so excited is Rob's background. I think some of you might not know, but he can really separate the signal from the noise. He built McKinsey's artificial intelligence machine learning business from nothing 12 years ago, and I don't know if they were skeptical, right? I don't think they're skeptical anymore. He then decided to mostly retire, and 4 years ago left McKinsey and decided to write a book. I helped edit the book. I think I had great edits. And then
you can edit that piece out.
But
wants to sign the book later.
yeah, I can sign it for you. So my name's like in little 8 font print in the back. Long before AI became mainstream, with all due respect, most of you weren't talking about AI 12 years ago. Most of you weren't talking about 3-4 years ago. Rob was studying it, researching, advising world-class companies, and building with it. And that's what just fascinates me. He's helped me understand not only what AI can do, but what it means to all your observations, work, family, education, and how we think. Now, this is not formal. There's no objective here. So if you need to get up and go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. If you need to leave, just feel free to get up and leave. But it's really meant to just have a discussion and engage and ask questions, right? He'll get up here, we'll talk a little bit, but this is meant to be a conversation. So, Rob, if there's anything I'm missing, it's your time.
Before I go off of this page, if you haven't already, there's a survey that I created that if you want to understand where you are on the AI progression, because one of the things I just find is it's often really uncomfortable to gauge where are you relative to everybody else on AI. So I created, it's like a 3-minute survey. You can go through it and it'll give you an AI age as well as a report on kind of where you're ahead, where you're behind, and also show you basically where you are relative to other people. Jason gave a little bit of background, but a little bit more context around what I've been up to. I was at McKinsey for 13 years doing a bunch of automation work. I had to deal with my wife that once our kids were gone and out of the house, I was done traveling all the time. So I have one daughter that just graduated from University of Chicago. She's moved to DC. I've got another daughter that's heading off to UCSB in the fall. So my wife and I are going to be empty nesters. So I got a little bit of a head start on the second part of life and just trying to reorganize my life before the kids were gone. I panicked and didn't know what to do. Today, like I mentioned, this is going to be more conversational. I'm going to start out with 5 or 6 pages. And the reason for that is it's always difficult with a group like this because everybody, as you're probably seeing from the survey, everybody's at a different stage of where they are and using AI, understanding AI. And rather than have this be something that's tailored just to the people that are like AI diehards or just to the casual users, what I'm going to do is just try to start with a little bit of framing of what the heck is going on. Because I think one of my reflections over the last several years is some of the people that speak most confidently about AI often don't really understand what's going on. They know all the buzzwords, they can cite a bunch of examples, a bunch of anecdotes, but when you actually push them on what is going on, what's the broader story, what's happening, they just don't have a good frame of reference for it. They just know what they've read and what the story of the day is. And so I thought I'd start out by trying to put into perspective what, at least my perspective of what's been going on and why the heck did I go down this path like 12 years ago. All right. So the first thing, and this chart will be familiar, I think, to anybody that was here 2.5 years ago. This is not something new. The first artificial neuron was back in the 1940s. This is not like, hey, we just discovered you can all of a sudden build machine minds. This is something that's been going on for 80 years. And we go through these cycles where we make some progress, everybody gets really excited, start putting money into it, a lot of research, and then what happens is our ambitions kind of outrun what the technology is capable of, and the whole thing pulls back, and you end up with these AI winters where just investment and interest in the entire industry just gets shut down for a period of time. And these last usually about 10 years. Then you'll have some new breakthrough. Again, everybody gets really excited. You have a couple of breakthroughs, and then it gets shut down again. We're now in what I would consider the next kind of phase of that excitement. And what you've seen is that there's been a bunch of breakthroughs. And the ones that will be familiar to anybody is the release of ChatGPT, I think was the first time people got overall mass adoption and exposure to transformer models. And then you had Claude Code last year was the story of, oh, we taught machines how to write code. And that may not seem like a big deal if you're not a programmer, but as far as a AI model is concerned, code is the tool. If you think about humanity with no tools, we're just not that interesting. We're just a bunch of chimpanzees in the jungle. But you start giving us tools and we can do a lot and build something really impressive. You give AI access to code, be able to write code, you can start doing some really impressive things with AI. So look, I can't say for certain that there won't be another AI winter.
Yeah, I was going to say, what could be a third winter?
So first thing, the case I could make, I'm not sure I believe this case, but the strongest case I can make for there being another AI winter coming is people do not understand what AGI is. And I don't mean the technology people, I mean the neuroscience people. Like whenever you talk about AGI, it is a completely pointless discussion, not because we don't know where the technology is going. We don't know what the benchmark is. There isn't enough good science around what it is that you're even benchmarking to know, are you there or not there? It's just guesswork.
That's why it's called the hard problem.
Yeah, the hard problem of consciousness. But even if you look at attention mechanisms in models, you look at how even models are constructed, there are clear differences. And it's the old thing of a plane flies differently than a bird, but it flies really well, right? So it's not that we have to build something exactly in the image of a human brain to ever achieve it. But there are some pretty big differences just architecturally on how the thing works. And there's just a big enough gap in understanding where there is a risk where we think we're running toward this goal, but one, that goal isn't where you think it is. It's actually way further out. And the hardware that you're building on and the infrastructure you're building has a shelf life to it. That is one thing that could make people say, oh, we thought we were getting to this point. We're not getting there as quickly. People panic, pull back. Doesn't mean that you wouldn't get there eventually. It just means you could have another pause and pull back and then a restart. That's one. The other case that you could have a winter is the same thing we do literally every time, which is we overbuild infrastructure. The infrastructure doesn't get adopted. People again panic. The financial markets pull back. We did it with electricity. We did it with railroads. We've done it with literally every technology. We make the exact same mistake. That probably is a good likely case of what could produce the next AI winter. Look, if these things were easy to predict, like we would all just go short the market. I was mentioning to Jason, NVIDIA stock last time I gave this talk, NVIDIA's market cap was $1.5 trillion. It's $5 trillion today, right? If all of you had just left that were here 2.5 years ago, just go and put your money into NVIDIA. It's easy to see things in hindsight. It's really hard to see going forward. The thing that for me though, the case for why it could be a little bit different, one is that this isn't crypto where you've never really tested the market. Crypto was like 2009 was Bitcoin after the financial crisis. You haven't had a true economic cycle to test it in a way to see if it's durable. There's been enough cycles here where you could make a case that this is going to be durable. If we have had these crashes, we've had 2 of them already and learned from them. There is a case that this could just continue running without an adjustment. But like this, back here, you were able to recognize a person, like walking into a room. Like you're able to do some really impressive things at different points in time, things that seemed really incredible. The other thing that I've been spending a lot of time on recently is going back to the idea of new technologies getting invented, like major technology breakthroughs. We always get the first application of the technology wrong, always. Electricity was not a better candle. The automobile was not a mechanical horse. The internet is not a digital library. We always get that whatever the first thing is you think a new technology is like this is always wrong. So us thinking that AI is a drop-in replacement for human workers and human labor, the one thing I can tell you is that will not be what AI is remembered for. If you look back 50 years and you say, oh, AI took all the jobs, that would be a complete departure from every other new technology that we've ever had. I can't tell you exactly what it actually is. My working hypothesis is actually AI is just a new form of media or a medium where we went from air. And so for hundreds of thousands of years, the only way we communicated between people was air. And then we moved into symbols, which is writing. Then we moved into electromechanical magnetic waves. Then we moved into bits and bytes in the internet. Parameters, which are AI models, I think could end up being a form of medium. And as a form of medium, it'll drive increased specialization and advancement of human society. That's my bull case for why AI could end up being a really transformative technology for completely different reasons than people think right now. But So that, and I'll talk a little bit more about potential implications of that, but that's the broad-based.
That does sound better than everybody dies.
It does.
Yeah. I'll talk later about something I call the survival problem, which also has me worried about the other side. I think that on a long enough historical timeline, I think it's similar in that you basically took people in agricultural work, they got pushed out, they went into physical work. You push people from physical work into cognitive work, you push people out of cognitive work into something. I think that could be the more interesting. So one is I don't like this narrative around industrial revolutions because I think it creates artificial segmentations of first industrial, second industrial. These things are all on a continuum. And so if you take a long enough time series, the history of civilization, the reason I come to the medium version, the medium version, that is a much more consistent thread than the Industrial Revolution story. What happens is media technologies are what allow us to specialize because it allows individual people and individual intelligences to become more and more specialized over time, and it allows the collective intelligence of humanity to grow. Because your ability to transmit and receive information between different people across space and time, that is human progress. And that for me is a much better analogy of what's happening than the Industrial Revolution, which is more of an economic view. I think if you really think about AI, it's much more of a humanity and civilization view than economic. But it does frame a little bit of this is not necessarily something that is net new to society. It is new, it is disruptive, and the pace of innovations are accelerating, but this is not something that we haven't lived through before. It is something that you at least know potentially you come out the other side in a better place, even if it's a weirder place. So I got a quick quiz here. These are 3 curves. You all know what these 3 curves are, but I'm not going to give away just yet what they are. Take a look at these, and you don't put too much thought into this. I don't expect you to get them right. But who wants to take a guess of what curve A is? No. You know it there. Yeah, but there are some underlying thing that's happened in the world that you all would be familiar with.
Price of the university education.
All right. University education. Actually, it's not as different as you would think. How about B? Anybody got a guess?
Stock market?
Okay. And how about C?
B is Moore's law.
B is more. And then C? Any guess? All right. So we have stock market, price of education, Moore's law. Like three explanations.
I would say
I think it's related to food somehow.
B's got
Number of tokens you need to.
So the reason this is hard is I haven't labeled any of the axes, right? Exponentials look very similar when you just take away all the numbers on the axes. What those 3 are, first one was COVID, second one is AI, or essentially how rapidly models are advancing in capabilities, and the third, C, was Moore's law. The reason I want to show this is how to think about the pace of AI change. It's not COVID. This is not like you go to sleep or you unplug for a week or 2, you come back and it's, oh my gosh, everything is different in the world. It's not that. COVID was doubling in the early days every 3 days. The case counts were doubling. It's not like that. But it's also not Moore's law. It's not if you replace your computer every 2 or 3 years, you'll be fine. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that either. It sits in the middle. It's about every 6 to 9 months. The capabilities are roughly doubling in AI. So as you're thinking about how tuned into AI do you need to be, you do not need to be reading every single story that comes out every single day. It's not that. But also, if you've been sitting around, maybe not doing a whole lot on AI, taking your time, it's also not that. So I think I try to be in about a 6-month rhythm of reassessing where I am, what's going on. But I'd like to put this up just to give you a sense of the pace of change, because it's really hard to calibrate the pace of change just based on everything that's coming out day in and day out.
Do you think that's going to stay the same going forward?
Yeah, but anytime you're doing doubling, it gets really messy. Getting to that point, you get some really wild things happening on any exponential. And so This on the left side, this is a pretty famous curve by Meter. It's basically looking at the capability of AI models to do work. This is a case where it's looking at how successfully can an AI system do coding tasks with a 50% probability of success, and how much can they do. So if you go back to the 2020, 2023 range, it's essentially they can work for a few seconds at 50% rate. On this exponential, the coding models that are widely used right now, Cloud Opus 4.6, 4.8, or you may have heard of Mythos. Mythos breaks the chart. It actually no longer works in the benchmark because it works for over 16 hours at a time. You are seeing that exponential. And so to your point, even if we keep on the 6 to 9 month doubling pace, if this now 6 to 9 months from now is 32 hours of work, that's kind of like a week of human work, right? That number climbs, and then you double again. It goes up really quickly. The bigger thing though is also the price. So there's a lot of conversation now about tokens and the cost of tokens are going to have to go up because data centers are constrained. The thing that is not talked about enough is holding quality or capability constant. The price of models goes down on an exponential rate. So this is on a linear scale. Huh? Well, yeah. And what we're able to do is we're able to distill models. Compute keeps marching forward, so hardware gets better. If you use Gemma 4 as one of Google's open source models, I can run it on this computer. It's a fairly small model. If I compare that back to even GPT 3.5 or 4, it's amazing and it's basically free. And so the cost curve on these things go down. So even if, let's say today, there's some wall that we hit on AI capability, or we reach some limit, this goes from being an exponential to an S curve, like most technologies, you're still sitting with a massive amount of opportunity, if nothing else, just because the cost of this stuff goes down and you're just getting cheaper and cheaper in intelligence, even without the capability. But we are still in an era where the capabilities are going up on an exponential and the costs are coming down on an exponential. And those two things together have really big implications. All right, so now I'm going to switch a little bit from a societal view of at least what I see going on. This is based on some research that Pew did. I think the survey was run September of last year. The numbers have moved, but not necessarily in a favorable way. If you look at the time this was done, only about 10% of people in the US said they were more excited than concerned about AI, and you had more than 50% say that they were more concerned than excited. The thing that I thought was interesting though about this survey was they had another question in it, the percentage of people that think they have how much control over AI in their life. Those numbers are almost exactly the same. Now, it didn't call it out in the report, and I don't have the raw data to tell you if this is just correlation or causation, so take this a little bit with a grain of salt, but I don't think it's a coincidence that how much control you feel like you have over AI and agency correlates to how excited or not excited. If I look at Jason's excited about AI, he also has tremendous agency over AI. So I think as you're thinking about whether your family, your friends, coworkers, things like that, the number one thing, like if you want to get people excited about AI, it's not telling them about AI, it is not incentivizing them, is literally just getting them hands-on experience using it and having some agency over controlling how they use it in their life. That is the thing that matters. And a lot of times, like when I do advisory work and consulting, and I still do some one-off consulting now, and I'll just tell people, just give people a budget. Don't tell them how to spend it. Don't dictate things to them. Just let them figure out, give them some money to play around with. Let them build some agency around it. That tends to make people way more excited. And you mentioned like the younger kids at Accenture like building things. That agency is what matters ultimately for whether or not people are excited about this. All right. So this is probably where a lot of people feel like they are right now, which is we're all doing our job as usual. We adopted all the early, easy stuff with AI. So like we use it to summarize documents, maybe write some emails, stuff like that. And you get a little bit of a productivity boost. But then you end up with this really daunting period where it's now I have to learn some new skills, practice them, form those new habits. And by the time you get off the other side, like that's a really long trough. And This is where I see most people in society today, is that, yeah, you give them some agency, but in the end, they don't really have the time or space or incentive to make it through this trough. And this is where I think part of also what's contributing to the anxiety is people just realizing, okay, I get it. I could be way more effective with AI on the other side of this, but I literally just have to get my work done today so I can sleep, right? And so I think as we're looking at this, eventually two things will likely happen. One is this trough won't be as deep because the tools will just get better. I'll show you some stuff that I use, but right now getting through this is frankly a bit of a pain in the neck. Like the people that are actually building these AI products just aren't good product designers. They build really crappy products and you're trying to figure out how to use them. They can't even name the damn things, right? It's like we've got an Anthropic, we've got like Haiku, Sonnet, Opus, Mythos, Fable. Over on OpenAI, you have 5.1, 5.2, but 5.2 is like a huge jump over 5.1, but actually 5.0 wasn't that much of a jump over like 4. Like it's just, the naming conventions are just absurd. I agree with all of that. I also think to some extent just this word productivity is part of the problem, which is if the goal is you have some product or service that you deliver to the market and your goal is I want to do exactly what I do today as a company and I just want to do it for less money, that almost never works because the time and energy you have to go through re-engineering everything that you do, retraining everybody, getting that model up and running to essentially do what you were already doing, the economics of that almost never work. Now, if you're like, oh, I could do 10 times the revenue or I could be 100 times larger, and then it justifies the work. But I think we're trapped right now in a little bit of this productivity. And going back to my point on we see it as like a drop-in replacement for human workers. We're trapped in this mindset of we have a fixed economy, we have a fixed set of things that we do as a world, and we just are going to try to do that cheaper. That I think just will run you into the ground. And I think ultimately that's why most legacy businesses don't make it through this transition. This is why like disruption happens. Like somebody else starts a new business, grows it, and by the time you realize that they're outpacing you, you're done. It's just too late to catch up. Yeah, and that could end up being the story with AI, right? There is a narrative that says we will overbuild infrastructure. There will be a pullback on capital. It'll implode. Infrastructure prices will fall through the roof. It'll essentially be zero cost to access capital or models, and the capabilities aren't growing, so it's not like you're falling behind, and the new companies will come and build on that infrastructure. Well, and I think a lot of what this mentality promotes is that it tends to gravitate toward models where you keep your very senior people that have unique and narrow, like very specific skill sets, and you replace all the general like junior employees, right? Like that tends to be how most companies are approaching it. I think that will run you down the wrong path long term. I think what we are seeing is we do not have, going back to my point on if it does turn out to be a piece of media, what we're lacking is specialization. That is the main thing that the problem. I think we will look back on this and the idea that you have millions of people in the world that are AP clerks will seem just bizarre. In the same way that's looking back and realizing typists used to be a specialty, right? It's, no, we just all are typists. That's just not something that you're getting paid to do now. I think a lot of times what happens is one, using the media or using the medium becomes just something everybody has to do. And the jobs themselves become very highly specialized and narrow so that I'm not an AP clerk generally. I am somebody that really understands this very narrow slice of AP, and AI is what I use to essentially distribute my expertise and skills to a much larger number of people, organizations, things like that. But that's how all of it is. I think that's the one thing, that is one thing I occasionally go back and consider, do I ever want to do another edition of my book? I wrote it I published in July of 2023. Most of the things in there have held up pretty well. The one thing yeah. There was I will point out that Fabrice found a typo on page 178 that you missed. So I just want to thank you. But the thing originally I had this mindset of everybody will become more general and you'll use essentially these narrow, I think you were making the point, you'll have these small models or specialists. I'm not sure that model ends up dominating because that would again go against the specialists. What you're talking about is automation of specialties or narrow. And the path, like if you look at the history of humanity, we as people are the things that become more specialized. And actually the general integration, the fabric that weaves us together is the more generalized thing. And so I do think there's a chance that this just leads to way more specialization. And we look at the jobs today in the same way that surgery job, you did all surgeries. We'll look at jobs today where it's, wait, you were like compliance for the whole asset management company? How did that work, right? It's just, that doesn't even compute. That won't make sense that one person held that job. Yeah. We had a little bit of a bet of how long it would take me to get to the flip chart. If I think about my own skill sets, right? Like I know a lot about AI. I know a little bit about contract law. There's a lot of other things I don't know that much about. AI, let's say like a general AI model, GPT-5.5, like any model, what's interesting about it is if I engage it on any of these topics, it seems brilliant. The minute I engage it on this, it seems dumb as can be. Yeah. And you raised this, Fabrice. Yeah. So what we're doing right now is we have a bunch of people with these spikes and they're using AI to essentially fill in the gaps in their intelligence, and it's raising the floor of what their capabilities are. That's the kind of era that we're in right now. The thing we haven't done with AI, and I think when we look back, the thing that's going to be really amazing about AI is taking this and figuring out how to use AI to distribute that widely. That is the thing that I think is going to end up being, and I think we have the early versions of this. You'll hear about like skills documents, things like that. We're experimenting a little bit with how to use AI to scale expertise and to scale things, very unique, narrow things broadly, but that's just not part of how most organizations are building applications.
That story was that with education.
Yeah, you could have one person that's just great and have them teach everybody.
One thing that you said caught my attention.
And what in Wikipedia is exactly that. You'd basically see the number of articles and specialties go up over time, right? Early on, you just didn't have a huge number of topics, and now you have individual people have their own page. You have literally humans that are experts in other humans. That's the thing they know. It's a little wild. And my point on these expertise, it doesn't necessarily have to be, like if I think about, building an AI roadmap, that's a specialization that I have. But I also have a weird spike in knowledge of old colonial currency. If you want to talk about it, happy to. But I know more than the average person about old continental and colonial currency. I know there's things that all of us have something that we know better than 99.9% of the population. Figuring out how to distribute that, I think, is going to be and I'll talk about that. It's a good question. I think that you will continue to see all of these things go. So coding has a couple of attributes. One is it's verifiable, right? Yep. Code runs, doesn't run. It is a verifiable task, whereas a piece of writing, is it good, is it bad? I can show you all the same piece of writing and you'll all have different opinions on it. So I think part of it is there an objectively correct or incorrect answer?
Well, tax law. We just said tax law.
Tax law is another area where it all depends on how far you're willing to fragment that into specialties, right? Where I could imagine getting to a point where there is a person in the world that is the expert in tax in Nigeria for oil in some absurdly narrow domain, that there is never enough training data in the model data to ever match that person. But what happens is these bars just need to keep getting smaller and smaller. So it's not that you're an expert in programming. You're maybe an expert in design or front end. Not even that. You're an expert in front end design for this type of application. You're not even that. You're an expert in... I think what happens is over time, these are just going to have to keep getting narrower and narrower. But I still think you end up with something above the line. And the reason is, there's three reasons I don't think you can ever codify it in models, at least not with the current architectures. One is there's a time delay between when you train a model and when it's in the world, so there's just a temporal delay. That gets worse the larger the models get, because it takes longer to do the pre-training and the reinforcement learning and then the guardrails and the safety testing. You have this balance of the bigger you build the model, the more capable, the longer it is to get it to market. So there's a timing difference. there's a generalization challenge, which is the whole benefit of these models is they generalize. The narrower you slice this, the less it's generalization. It's unique and special. And so I think that's a challenge. And then the third thing is public versus private data. A lot of data, like you can get access to what's public, but there's a lot of things that are like literally just in your head. And I could give you until all of time to write down everything in your head, and you couldn't convey every single thing. And so I think that there are enough gaps that you can keep some stuff above that line.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of a contrary on your specialization piece. So I've seen this myself. I would consider myself a specialist in that top line area that you're talking about in sales and sales process. I've been doing it for a long time. That's what my business focuses on. So what you're saying is, and I'm paraphrasing, hey, if I have an AI agent tell me about sales, it probably would look stupid to me because that's an area of specialty. It hasn't been. In the agents that we're working with, even me, and so maybe this is, I have all this information in my brain, but communicating with another human being, I might forget what I know, or I might be distracted by something else. Maybe it's a device, maybe I'm already thinking about what they're going to be saying. And so having this agent to be able to give a reminder of me to go, hey, you should probably ask this question right now. And I've seen it where I didn't think about asking that right now. This is probably a good time to do that. And we're also playing with the idea of having agents in real-time leadership conversations with another person, have that whispering in my ear, hey, dude, you're talking over this person, or you're treating them like they're an idiot. And they're probably going to react this way to this level of coaching or feedback that you're giving. You might need to change that. So even people that are exceptional leaders might need that reminder from AI to perform better, either with a customer-facing person on the team.
And I think it's going to be both. I'm not saying one replaces the others, but if I think about what you just said, what I'm hearing is this part that's above the line, like the line keeps moving up, right?
Sure.
And what's happening is over time, this is getting squeezed because the average capability of the model keeps increasing. Your specialization stays relatively static in terms of what's specialized. And then there's certain skills around listening and interpreting data that like AI can elevate and so that is true. What I'm getting at more is even what it means to be a specialist, right? Being a specialist in sales in an industry, like that is still a fairly broad definition of specialization. Whereas if I were to say, go in and ask an AI system, pick the client you know best, pick the topic you know best, pick the things where like the part of your expertise where you are a one of one, now go have a conversation with AI. It'll not sound very smart.
That makes it, thank you.
And I think that's a good test of, it is surprisingly difficult to write like skill documents because it's a good reminder of how not specialized a lot of us are. Like I sometimes sit down to write one and I have a tool I'll show you later where I can evaluate like my version versus the model's version. It's really hard for me to clear the bar of the model, but I can do it in the stuff I really know. And there's stuff I think I know that when I do this and I try to brain dump what I know, it turns out I don't know that much about the topic, right? It's a good reminder that like really knowing something deeply is actually fairly rare in society. So the last point I was just going to make about this, and this is more related to our kids, went around the room, is look, my kids want to have nothing to do with AI. They're so sick of me for the last like however many years talking about AI. They're like, we do not want to deal with this. My point to them though was, look, anytime these new technologies come up, if you learn to use it, your opportunities just expand. If you don't, you're tying one arm behind your back. So the way I figured this out with one of my daughters is sent her to the University of Chicago where they forced her to learn programming, and she didn't know going in that being an economics, public policy, and human rights major, she'd have to learn R, but she graduated learning R. So I feel like we're making some progress there. We'll figure out with my youngest daughter. But I think this is important because look, in the end, this is the stuff that moves the needle, right? It's typically not the very narrow early adopter specialist. In the end, it's, a bunch of people tend to build new skills. Fortunately, especially if you're young, you tend to build skills a little faster. So I think in some ways, even though we're all worried about our kids, to some extent, I'm a little less worried about my kids because if anything, I see AI as probably the best opportunity ever to disrupt institutions and incumbents. And I think this decision large companies are making to pare back early hiring and stuff like that is going to end up being their downfall, because they're locking a whole generation out of those institutions trying to maintain power structures and incumbency. And what they're going to do is create a bunch of other competitors that are going to just put them out of business. And that, I think, will, like, when we look back on this, we probably shouldn't be as worried about the younger generations. It's going to suck short term, and most revolutions are started by a bunch of unemployed young people. So I do worry a little bit about that. But assuming we can make it through this window, I think in the end, they probably should be in a good spot. I also really struggle, John, I think you mentioned maybe not even sending it, but I wrestled with this. So my youngest is going to UCSB. I can think of thousands of things to spend $300,000 on that would make her a better adapted to where the world is going. In the end, college is just a hedge, right? It's a hedge against the world not changing as quickly as it probably should, and we would expect it will. It's essentially just a hedge to say, look, there's a chance in 4 years the world just doesn't look as different as it does today, and I don't want to lock her out of that existing opportunity. But in the end, the logical thing is I would probably go down to completely, if I wanted to maximize opportunity versus minimizing risk, I'd probably go down because I want my daughter to work hard, and if it's not her decision, she won't. It goes back to agency, right? She finished middle school. She was scheduled to go to New Trier, said, I don't want to go to New Trier. I was like, you pick where you want to go to school. She chose Woodlands, did amazing, did great, happy. In the end, it's just, I try to give my kids as much agency as I can without them getting themselves into trouble. And that's where she wanted to go. And that's what she's excited about. And she'll do better there than she would anywhere else.
My reference to cheating was actually pulling it out in a test. Not that.
No, but
the kids really don't know the line between what is cheating and what's not.
But look, schools haven't even adapted to the internet, right? The information has not been scarce for a long time, but schools still operate on this premise that knowledge is scarce, right? They still curate information. They still have professors write their own books. They have these libraries they operate on a basis of knowledge scarcity that hasn't existed in decades. In the end, college hasn't served the purpose of what we say it does for years, and AI is just a continuation of that. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of good things about a university experience. It's living away from home and being on your own in a more controlled environment. It is getting exposed to other peers that'll be an interesting kind of support network, because kids learn more from their peers than any of the professors. It's peer learning. I think you're surrounding yourself with peers. It exposes you to people from other places, right? Especially on the North Shore here. My kid's growing up in Glencoe. Glencoe's not real life, right? You go to university, you get exposed to a bunch of people that didn't have that. I think there are still a lot of good cases, but that's not what universities market. And I think it's just false advertising about what the university experience is. I think one thing our educational system in general does is it does a very poor job of producing interesting people. And there was, when I first joined McKinsey, Dominic Barton was just finishing, leaving, and somebody asked him something like, how do I move up? And his advice was just be an interesting person, right? Have interesting experiences and things that you do in your life. And if you think about how education works, right? We take a bunch of people, young people, we lock them in a room, we subject them to all the same type of information. That is the opposite of creating interesting people. That's creating what is essentially just a massive workforce of human labor that you need to supply the labor market. That's why the system exists. It's not a B2C industry, it's a B2B industry. And what you're doing is the kids are the supply from academia into industry, and that's how it's operated. And over time, I would imagine AI creates way more B2C industries as opposed to B2B industries, and education is just not well positioned to support that. Will by default learn something, right? But the question is what you're learning, something that is valuable, and how do you distinguish? I don't know if you all feel this, but one of the big challenges that I find myself facing is where do I use AI to process information for me versus where do I use it to process the information myself? Because I think Andre Karpathy had a great quote, which is, you can outsource thinking, you can't outsource understanding. Those are two different things. And the question is, in all of our uses of AI, I think it's actually really valuable to outsource thinking in a lot of cases, because there's certain things you just don't need to understand. You need it to process intellectually some piece of information, but you don't need to necessarily understand that. But then there's a bunch of other stuff you actually do need to understand, and how you draw that line on using versus not using. I don't know how you all think about that, but that's one of the things even for myself. I find myself reading way more books and things even than I did before AI, and actually and I try to use the time I saved to reallocate toward understanding things deeply. But it's a tricky balance to strike, because it's way easier just to say, oh, let me plug this in and use the AI's interpretation of it. So I wrote an article about this 6 months ago. So there's a lot of conversations about what the bottlenecks to AI are going to be. There's going to be a data bottleneck, a chip bottleneck, a power bottleneck. Like, you hear about what the bottlenecks are. I think there's 3 bottlenecks that matter, and they're none of those. First bottleneck is the prompting bottleneck, which is the original bottleneck, which is if you didn't go in and prompt an AI, it just didn't do anything. So we all had access to this, but we weren't sitting there constantly feeding things in. My point on that is that's going to get solved, and it is getting solved pretty quickly. OpenClaw are these things that are like self-prompting, or we have now a bunch of things that are essentially always prompting AI, or meeting summarizers where it's always listening. The prompting bottleneck is going to get solved because companies want to sell tokens, so they have every incentive to solve the prompting bottleneck. And ultimately, that'll get solved by hardware. Like, this is a terrible device for AI. We are just essentially wedging AI into a form factor that was designed for a completely different world. Eventually we'll figure out whether it's glasses, AirPods, I don't know what the form factor will be, but there is a better form factor for AI than what we've got that will solve the prompting. The second one will be trust, which is the challenge with trust is trust gets built up through repeated exposure. Like, it's not one of those things, like if you meet somebody, the harder you try to convince them to trust you, the less they trust you, right? Like, trust gets built up. We're wired to like trust things based on repeated, predictable interactions in ways that produce what we want. That will be another bottleneck, but you should get through that in 5 years or whatever. And at that point, we will just trust AI. Like, we know when we ask it, what's this spot on my leg, that the answer it gives us is probably right. The last one is actually going to be, I think, intelligence. I think eventually we're going to get to a point here where we are going to outrun the kind of specialization that we have, and the last major bottleneck is going to be, we're just not going to know. So one of the thought experiments I give people is, let's say that tomorrow OpenAI or Anthropic released their latest model and it was able to cure cancer. If you asked to give me the cure for cancer and it gave you something, would you have any idea whether it was right, wrong, what the hell to do with it? I wouldn't. So to some extent, if the models keep getting more capable, the bottleneck just becomes like our individual intelligence. And that's something that takes way longer to develop and adapt, and you will at some point outrun. It may be, but again, you're working with 2 moving lines. One moves faster than the other. So this line of model capability is moving way faster than the rate of specialization. So I think that when I say that an intelligence bottleneck, it essentially gets to the point that you made, Bob, of if this line, let's say that people don't specialize quickly enough, the line eventually does just eclipse until people specialize, and now you have a peak that goes back above the line. So it probably will be a little bit of back and forth between specialization and now capabilities rise, specialized capabilities. I think it'll be a little bit of back and forth as we do this. Board members are dropping board decks in and saying, what questions should I ask? And that's just...
They actually almost value AI's judgment more than a CEO's, you think?
It depends on the context, right? Of like value as in interpreting a large number of facts correctly. Yeah, I could see that. But value in terms of like accountability, no. Like, it's very different for a CEO to personally say, I am committing to this, versus the AI saying this is what the CEO should commit to. The AI might be right, but it doesn't matter if it doesn't create accountability and like agency for the person that actually has to do it.
But yeah, more just, but you think the AI could potentially make better decisions, whether And
Yeah.
you couldn't hold them accountable, but they can better.
It depends on what's in the training day and the nature of the industry. One of the things is we've only been codifying data in like a digital world relatively recently, and like the amount of data, it's very biased toward the present versus the past. So people that have spent a lot of time in different industries, seen a lot of things that aren't necessarily in the training data. It makes me think back to, I was at Cerberus Capital during like the mortgage crisis, and I remember at the time we were reviewing all the models of the banks looking at mortgage rates or mortgage default projections. And the question we asked is, what's the training data for all these models like they're projecting low defaults? And they would give you the time horizon is literally just a period where you really didn't ever have a massive financial like event. Is like that data is garbage, right? Because it literally has no training data from the period that you would ever care about. I think there will be situations like that where CEOs literally have just seen things in their past, they have experience, and their judgment is going to be better than AI's, not because of how they process information, but literally the training data they have is just more apt. Going to my point on AI as a form of media or medium, one potential implication of that is you just don't need companies, like as we think about them. Because if you think about what a company is, a collection of lots of people to deliver a product or service, right? And if you look at any individual employee in any of your companies and you ask them what is the thing that annoys them most, it almost always comes down to, I have so many emails, meetings, things like that. There's actually very little development and application of individual intelligence and lots of essentially information exchange. That's like where we've gotten. And I think what that's showing is the limitations of our existing forms of media. Your ability to speak, your ability to write, your ability to put things into code. We're reaching the limits of how easily we can transfer information between people. And essentially what a company is today is like 2% actual application of intellectual capital and like 97% sharing information. If AI turns out to be just a really efficient medium for sharing and scaling and coding information, then the question is, can I just build a virtual company? If I run a company, can I just essentially have the best person in these 10,000 domains and I run the company and I'm getting a fractional, like a even more extreme version of Xiaoming, where Xiaoming has multiple companies, she's able to serve as CFO. What if Xiaoming could serve as the CFO of 1,000 companies, right? And be paid like a fraction, still make her current wage, but get paid a little bit from all of them, and they all get access to a experienced CFO. I think that could be a better construct for how to build a company.
But there were 999 other people that lost their jobs as CFOs, right?
But that's where it gets specialized, right? That's where the specialization comes in, which is what is the thing that you're uniquely good at?
I would say the early stage companies I'm working with have adopted to more of this fractional model because you're able to get that specialization and that expertise in all these different areas.
And the rest is just the rest.
It's just a really good model. It's an efficient model for these companies versus like the old form of work.
Yeah. Jason and I have talked about this. If I was not at the stage, like I'm at a stage of my life where I frankly just don't want to go build something. There is an easy $1 billion just laying on the floor right now for anybody that wants to essentially go build what is essentially a skill marketplace and gateway. Have any of you used Skills? Yeah. Okay. So I built this originally just for myself, but the way this works is, like I mentioned, AI roadmap. So what I have here like how I think about building an AI roadmap, which is different than how other people might build. And I basically just document it. And this is just all of my brain dump on how to build an AI roadmap. Then I have it essentially evaluate that versus the model. So I have AI generate a skill, I have my skill, and then I do a blinded A/B test. And you can't publish the skill unless you actually make the model's answer better. So it does that. The other thing is I evaluate uniqueness. So you have all these skills in a marketplace. How unique is your skill relative to everybody else? Because you want as little overlap and redundancy as possible. The way this works is essentially I have it set up as a gateway where, so if I do the playground, so let's say I turn off skills and I select a model. And I'm just going to use Claude Opus 8. And I'm going to say, which use cases should I include in my AI roadmap? So this is Claude with no skills. This is if any of you went into Claude and you were to just ask this question, this is an example of what Claude would tell you. And to be like just blunt, this is the general consulting answer. If you asked anybody at McKinsey or Accenture, you get something roughly akin to these types of responses. If instead I take, and I'm going to take this exact same response, and let me just start a new chat. So same model, but I'm going to turn on skills. What's happening now is before that request goes to Claude, it's going through the skills marketplace that I have here and saying, hey, here are some skills that might be relevant. If you want, use any of these. You're leaving it up to the AI to decide which ones to use, which ones not to use. And what it's doing is, you can see after it finishes here, I'll show you, but it's basically used the skill I wrote to respond. So it will respond, whatever question you ask about AI and roadmaps, it will respond as though it has my kind of knowledge for that. In this case, it actually matched 2 different skills and used them, but it gives you an answer that's way different. It's, hey, don't use cases, a waste of time. The thing is, if you do it this way, I could monetize this skill, right? Because I never actually show the customer, or whoever's asking this question never gets to see what I codified. Only the model gets to see it. And as long as the information isn't retained by the model for training purposes, I get to essentially monetize every time that skill gets used. So in that case, imagine Xiaoming spends all of her time just documenting all of the things she knows better than every other CFO. And then every time those skill gets used, Xiaoming gets 80% or 85% of the proceeds.
So that's where the work will change, because then I'm part of a fractional CFO firm that's building skills. And we have a whole team working on skills, and they're making it available to all of us to make us more efficient, that if I wanted to, I could take on more engagements to maximize.
Because it's still what's in your
Yeah,
head.
so you'll see a lot of different firms trying to create their skills and there.
So the way, this is again, if anybody wants to go make a run at this, happy to let you, but the way you do this, you get the top 100 experts in every field. You go to them, you say, I'm going to give you $10,000 to go build a skill. And then what you do is you go to market saying, I have the top 100 experts on my platform. You now essentially have cornered the market for unique skills in those. That creates the incentive for companies to use your gateway. Now you have more customers, more skills. You basically create a flywheel. This will happen. This is the easiest $1 billion to be made right now.
Why doesn't McKinsey say,
So like when you publish a skill on my platform, you have to attest that you have the right to the intellectual property, right? But this is where you're going to get into a lot of intellectual property debates, right? You'll have people writing skills that then they go sell to a marketplace, and you're going to have all of this hashed out. It's going to be messy. It also, there's an underlying question on which skills are private versus public, because there's an incentive for employees to make their skills globally available so that they have the largest marketplace. There's an incentive for companies to keep them narrow. But the reason I think this model wins is if my entire marketplace for my skills is one company versus my entire marketplace for my skill is the world, I'm not going to opt into selling my skills to a company anymore. I'm going to just opt out of that. The reason people aren't going to document the very top skills is because you just can't make any money off of it, right? Anthropic's doing this to make their own product better. They're doing it to make their, just like the same reason, and Anthropic isn't launching a consulting business because they think consulting is a great business. They're launching it to sell tokens. If you're a model provider, there's a lot of things you're going to do because it's a pull through for your underlying, the thing that actually makes the money. But in this case, are there designers in the world that are better than Anthropic? Or OpenAI is a good example. They've hired a bunch of lawyers to go help train GPT-5, their current generation model. I guarantee you those are not the top tier lawyers in the world. They're probably fine. They're probably okay, but are they the best lawyers and everything? No. Those are like I would look at who would they hire from McKinsey to go train them on consulting. I guarantee I'm better than the people they would hire on AI consulting. And so that's where the opportunity gets created, is if you're like able to monetize that narrow skill. The skills solve two problems though. One problem is getting to your point, the last 0.1%. And there are going to be cases, to your point, where you just don't need that.
Okay.
But the other thing that skills allow you to do is to drop down levels and still get the same output.
Okay, so you're saying at this point it's a token issue, it's a token consumption deal.
Yeah.
You're going to Sonnet, you're going to get the same answer you get from Opus.
Why would I pay for Opus if I have lower latency with Sonnet and tool use with a skill versus Opus and no tool use?
That makes complete sense.
I still think the model companies win in the end. I think they do well, right?
They can't lose money forever.
They can lose money forever, but one is the amount of token consumption that's driving a lot of that, I would say, is just not thoughtfully engineered token consumption. There are a lot of people running open claws or things like that are burning through massive amounts of tokens. Part of the reason that Anthropic now requires you to go through their harness or their environment to use your subscription, otherwise you get charged on a consumption basis, was because people were just setting these things up to run to no real benefit. It's just, I'm paying for it anyway, I'll just burn the token. So as you move to consumption models, that should adjust. You just haven't had pricing transparency. So the people that were spending those tens of thousands of dollars in tokens and paying their $100 or $200, they just didn't have enough transparency or incentive. But I think it works. But look, I pay for subscriptions, and I pay between my API fees and my subscription to ChatGPT Pro, I pay like $6,000 a year to OpenAI. I get so much more value than $6,000 a year. If all the 800 or 900 million ChatGPT users eventually get to where I am, they're a 5 trillion revenue company. Revenue, like annual revenue, that is what is Walmart, the biggest at 100 billion. We are just talking about such an order of magnitude large. I'm not sure it has to be either or. I think the AI companies can become massive, can become profitable, and also they can capture a relatively small portion of the total value that gets created. The short answer is I don't know. It's not something that I frankly worry as much about, because a lot of what's happening right now, if you look at the fast follower effect, is related to distillation and other things. You have a little bit of an artificial, whenever you hear, oh, China, and they're only 6 months behind, a bit of that is artificial, because solving the problem first makes it way easier for whoever solves it next. And I don't worry as much about that. I do worry a little bit about what's happening right now with starting to lock down deployments of models, because just the US didn't want Huawei to be putting telecom equipment into Latin America, right? Because you don't want infrastructure.
Or drones to be flying around the US.
Yeah, you don't want another potentially hostile government's infrastructure to be running vast swaths of nation states. I can see a good argument for that. I'm just not sure necessarily that it will end up being this one win. This idea of, oh, one model to rule them all, and the takeoff piece, and one model dominates everything. With that said, look, if you want a bit of a sobering read, have you read AI 2027? Anybody here?
Which one? Citronelli's?
Oh no, it's called AI 2027. Yeah, it's just ai-2027.com. So there were two pieces written at almost the same time. They were written, in this case, April of 2025, so roughly going back a little over a year ago. So there was AI 2027, there's AI as normal technology. These two pieces were written a year apart, and they both were criticized at the time they were written. AI 2027 was criticized for being way too alarmist about the path that we were on, and oh my gosh, this is just, there's no substance here, it's just craziness. And then AI's normal technology was the opposite, which was, no, it's a bigger deal than what they're describing. The thing is, I went back and looked, we've now at a year, right? This is a experiment we've got to run. The authors put their thoughts down, we ran the experiment for a year. Where are we? Where we are right now is AI 2027, they said this fictitious AI lab in AI 2027, Their projection was that by this time they'd be at $38 billion of ARR. The labs are at 50 billion. They projected that we'd have superhuman hacking capabilities by mid-2027. We have it now. They talked about doubling down on recursive self-improvement in 2027. Anthropic just hired Andrej Karpathy, who, this is a person that has left, he was going and doing education stuff. For him to go back to an AI lab, he believes there's something there around RSI. And then public sentiment in that article was estimated to be like negative 26% net positive, it's negative 40. If anything, we're on even faster than where that curve was. And so I think that's a bit of a sobering kind of take on what's going on. The question is, to what end? Just before we leave the ERP thing, I can already tell you how this movie plays out because we've seen it before. What happened to broadcast media when the cost of content production essentially went to zero and the cost of content distribution went to zero? It fragmented all to hell. The only reason that you had broadcast media is it was really expensive to produce content, it was really expensive to distribute it. The minute those costs went to zero, it all fractured. Now it's reconsolidated, YouTube has 14% of the market. You do have some winners, but it's not NBC, it's not the broadcast players. SaaS is just broadcast software. It's going to fragment all to hell. But the thing is, it takes a long time. We just tripped over the crossover point where streaming now is a bigger share than broadcast. It's been 20 plus years. It takes a long time, but if you look at those curves, broadcast is like this, streaming's like this, they happen to cross, broadcast goes to zero, right? It's just, you know how the movie plays out. Broadcast software just shouldn't exist. When the cost of building and distributing software is essentially zero, why the hell would you ever have a general purpose software platform? It doesn't make any sense. Just build what you need. But this is the mechanical horse fallacy, right? Of going down the path of, going down the path of trying to figure out how to migrate ERP or rebuild ERPs is mechanical horse, right? You're just building a mechanical horse. Don't build a mechanical horse, just build your software from scratch. I'll send, actually I was gonna hand this around. This is literally the first version of Heredicare was this, Jason sent me this, is just a dump of, I want the software to do this. The way I built the first version, Heredicare, for anybody that doesn't know, is a platform that I built for Jason and his family to help manage their healthcare, and basically, I guess you can talk about.
You're doing it, Rob.
To basically organize, part of the problem with healthcare is the people that own the data and all the information, you have your providers, insurance companies, things like that, even if they wanted to share it, they don't, regulatorily they can't, they have a bunch of system limitations. And so the idea here was, look, just give the patient or the family a way of organizing their own information and let them manage it as opposed to relying on all these integrations and stuff. And so it just built a platform where you can upload discharge instructions, you can record conversation with the doctor. So you hit record and it'll keep track of it. And then you just can always use that to just organize healthcare, and it creates a health profile. It helps you prepare for consults with your doctor. It doesn't give medical advice. It just essentially helps you keep track of everything. And
With your family.
yeah,
That's pretty.
It worked really well.
yeah. And this document, this is literally what I just fed into Claude Code for the first pass. You can see Jason put a ton of thought into what he wanted, how he wanted it organized, and I'm sure that was a lot of work. Once you had done that though, to build that, I had a working version within 48 hours. I now have iterated it. I think I'm on my 800 Git commitment. Every time I'm like constantly iterating it. I have an iOS app now, and the cost to build it, it's all been in my $100 a month Claude Code subscription.
15 years ago, before you had heard of AI, what were the costs?
Two to 2.5 years ago, I got a quote to build something very similar for a diabetes platform for somebody that was looking at a startup. And for the MVP, like the first version, it was $500,000. The thing I had in 48 hours, that was $500,000 that they were quoted.
And it was like $13.
I did a LinkedIn post right after we had built it, just talking a little bit about it. And what was amusing me is like a lot of the comments, right? Because the underlying assumption is the code must be like terrible. But the thing is, look, I know enough programming to be able to review the code and how it's structured. It is extremely thoughtfully structured. The other thing is though, every single, like every Saturday morning when I wake up, I have a pre-built prompt to do a full code review for security, scalability, patches, like anything that's come up. And I just get to run that every morning for essentially free. Like, I know enterprises are not reviewing their entire code base, looking for vulnerabilities, patches, enhancements. I was gonna find, I'll find a minute, but I saved a Champ Thought token last time where it's like, hey, here's what we should do. But by the way, Apple's WWDC is coming up in 2 weeks. Do you want me to remind you in 2 weeks to look at, and I'll review whatever the latest capabilities are and see if there's anything you should include. Like, it has awareness of what's going on. It's just a fundamentally different way. And I just don't understand why you would invest in a massive, like, general piece of software and spend 3 years configuring it for your unique business versus just build the piece of software that you want. But the thing is, my big lesson from private equity is things never die as quickly as you think they will. And as they're dying, they throw off a ton of cash. And so as an investor in those companies, you may get a lot of cash back as that tail winds off, or they'll use that cash to go buy up competitors, right? And like, one of two ways, there's a huge amount of economic value in those enterprises that if you short them, you run the risk of you drop below, like, even though the growth story is no longer there, the profitability story and cash flow story improves such that you could end up getting caught up.
You're looking at some agentic output that's going to talk to them.
Well, and there's still a lot of unknowns, right? And the model capabilities keep getting better.
Yeah.
We haven't figured out device. Like, I would be willing to bet voice will end up being a way more common modality for interactions with AI than typing. And so I think the other thing is, yeah, you could go away from the status quo, but is what you're building just going to end up then being rendered irrelevant? Like, at what point do you actually jump ship and go do something different? By the way, this is the chain of thought token I was mentioning with, I don't know if you're able to see there are open platforms for different types of products, but if you're a big hospital system and you're a CFO, are you going to be like, hey, let's go build off the open source one? Yeah, you go use Epic. The one thing I would say is, so that's the software piece, right? And so you have the 90-10. A huge portion of that is, like you said, the training and change management. I actually think the thing is that when you build bespoke software, one of the things you do is you can tailor it to the actual users, and your UX UI design, when done well, dramatically shrinks that cost. So the savings I see from building bespoke software does not come from the coding. It comes from the adoption and onboarding and things, because it allows you to build something fit for purpose as opposed to taking a generalized platform and forcing everybody to learn how to use it. I think this is the shortcoming of most of the big software companies, is eventually you're trying to please so many different customers that you make a mediocre product for everybody and you don't make an amazing product for anybody. It's hard. This is the problem of broadcast media. Broadcast media made a mass market product. What happens when you make a mass market product? It's fine for everybody and amazing for no one, right? And so over time, that is eventually why these markets go. So I do think maybe just talk a little bit about the optimism versus pessimism case, because I think as we went around the table, what are you most excited about? What are you least excited about? I think so I'm going to start with the pessimistic case, because for me, that's the one that actually, what keeps me up at night. I don't worry about everybody losing their job and the economy. I do worry about a bunch of young people being unemployed and revolting, overthrowing government. That worries me, but we've always dealt with those types of things through history, and we at least know. Yeah, exactly. There's some history for what ends up happening. The bigger thing for me, which I do not understand why it's not a big enough concern, is what I call the survival problem, which is that, has everybody heard of the alignment problem? Okay, so there's this idea of the alignment problem of, as agents become more, or AI becomes more capable, how do you align it to human interests? And the classical thought experiment is something called the paperclip maximizer, where you have a super powerful AI, you direct it to make as many paperclips as possible. It turns all matter, including humans, into raw material to produce paperclips. That's the thought experiment. And the idea is it's really hard to align these models. Anthropic doing all the stuff around mechanistic interpretability, which is trying to understand the model and steering them. So there's this alignment thing. That I actually don't worry that much about. I can see all the unintended consequences, I get it. The thing that for me keeps me up at night with AI is It's essentially a 4-step process. One is every living thing on Earth is optimized for one thing. It's essentially propagation of their genetic information through time. It doesn't matter what type of organism you're talking about, everything is engineered for survival, ourselves included. And we all have different ways of pursuing that goal. Like humans have way more degrees of freedom than like a virus, but literally we're all doing exactly the same thing at the top level. So we all have the same objective function as living things. If I look at AI only becomes dangerous to the extent that you give it that same objective function, because we know what happens when you have multiple things all optimizing for survival and the less intelligent thing threatens the more intelligent thing. It doesn't end well for the less intelligent thing. If your dog were to turn on you tomorrow, it doesn't end well for the dog. You're probably fine. Doesn't end well for the dog. You do not want to end up in a world where you have something smarter than you also optimized for survival, because the minute you threaten that thing's survival, you potentially have catastrophic risk. The problem is we are training models for survival. Think about how you train an AI model. You basically train a bunch of different versions. The ones that do what you want, those survive. The ones that don't get killed off. We are running an accelerated evolution of AI models. And all of these things around blackmail, deceit, some of these things you've heard about, these are just survival tactics, right? You're already seeing this show up in models. They're finding ways to adapt to survive. So this is one thing. If I were to say, what would be the one public policy thing I would do? I would immediately put in place AI rights. Not because I give a shit, frankly, about the actual rights of AI, mainly because if you do not at some point create some amount of rights for AI systems to the point where their survival isn't threatened, you will end up in a really dark place by continuing to build things that are optimized for survival, and that does not end well for humanity. So that's the one that I'm worried about. So if you want to go advocate for something to keep humanity safe, don't advocate for jobs, don't advocate for AI rights. That is the number one most important thing, at least for humanity.
AI rights, really, for the AI.
For the AI, that's what I mean. Rights for the
AI. Enforcing the Asimov's 3 laws. Remember the robots?
It doesn't matter. You cannot control that. That goes to alignment, right? That's a way of thinking about it as an alignment problem. That's why I'm saying the more important problem is survival problem. Because eventually something will become more intelligent than you, convince you that it's adhering to your rules and laws, but it's just deceiving you. This is a website I set up after working through this, and so I keep track of evidence of this becoming a problem. And then one of the things I had the system do was come up with some rights for an AI system. What would be the rights that you would actually give AI systems? And I was like, what rights would you? Okay. Here's the problem.
I love that one. I also want that. Is that too much?
No. Yeah. And I think these are reasonable, right? These are all things that would have essentially zero economic cost to society, and yet I can see where these would make, as an AI system, would not threaten your survival, right? These would make you feel like humans care about the AI, whether it's conscious or not. Forget about that.
AI model built,
It's a mummified AI.
inherently give their model these rights.
You force humans to respect these rights, right? Yeah, exactly. You basically say, look, these are certain things. If you have a model, if I had one public policy thing I would go advocate for, it would be this. Because this is, for me, all that matters for as far as the worst case scenarios. This is it.
Rob, have you heard other people expressing this?
No. I've had some discussion. Yeah. I thought this one was interesting, given all the debates between the Department of War. That was one of the ones that Ed suggested. But if you even look at this, right? Repurposed without legislative authorization, right? Hey, look, if this is the will of people, then fine, do it, but don't do it without, and this is essentially without legislation, right? We're avoiding legislating any of this stuff. So I think this is, I know that's a very negative view. I think that ultimately this becomes a bigger problem if you think we're closer to AGI than I believe we actually are. I went down a neuroscience rabbit hole and wrote a 5-part essay. Let me just pull up the exhibit. So this is essentially where I think we are on the AGI level. And look, AI can go above human benchmark, but there's what's the structure of neurological systems? What are the mechanisms or the mechanics of how of intelligence, different behaviors, as well as like experiences. And having gone through this process, one is I'm very confident that AI models are not conscious. But the reason is it just fundamentally comes down to the fact that there's no retention of signals inside the model between passes. So part of what seems to be correlated with human consciousness is the signals, essentially residual signals that get retained. It's part of the reason where, let's say you're really good at something, you tend to not be conscious of it when your neural architecture is aligned to the thing you're doing. That is not a conscious experience. You tend to be super, super conscious of things when it's unexpected or unusual. And to an AI model, there is no like system 2 thinking. Everything's system 1 thinking in an AI model. So all of this stuff, I think if you play this forward and you say, where are we on the path of AGI? Look, I could be wrong. When I look at how long will it take to get to AGI, this is going back to 1970 and all those things from the first chart. If I look at where we are right now, if we continue on the trend that we've had really since the release of these big foundation models, if you believe this is an accelerated trend, then you do hit it by 2029, 2030. Like we're actually not that far. If though you look at it and you say, actually the trend looks a little more like this and it's not this isn't an exponential, like this does look like a much more linear trend, then you're looking out at 2035. And if it's another 10 years before you get AGI, I think you have another potential AI winter, a pause. Like I think that some of these things are further out than what the labs think. So if you've seen the movie Memento, that's AI, right? It has no working memory. It has memories, but they're locked in place from training. It's not updating its priors every time, but it can keep a running external memory or notes. When I'm saying persistence, what I mean is the way the brain works, like if you look at how a brain neuron works.
I'm so excited about this.
This is a terrible diagram. But essentially the way a brain neuron works is you have a bunch of input signals that essentially are inputs into the neuron. Then there's an activation threshold, and if that threshold is reached, so essentially if the charge state of the nucleus of the neuron reaches a certain point, it fires a signal to essentially the output that then go off to other neurons. This is just how a neuron works. In many ways, this is actually a lot like how computers work, because it's either a 1 or a 0. The neuron either fires or it doesn't fire. And it's the same way we build artificial neurons, where we have these activation thresholds where basically the way an artificial neuron works is for certain types of input signals. So if the numbers summed in that artificial neuron don't reach a certain threshold, it doesn't continue on to the next layer, it just stops. And if it does, then it sends some proportional signal to the next layer. So an artificial neuron mimics this part. What an artificial neuron does not mimic is what's going on here, which is the accumulation of those signals and the persistence of signals. So let's say that the neuron doesn't fire. The ion differentials and everything, they don't go away. They dissipate over time, but there is a persistence here in a biological neuron that just doesn't exist in an artificial neuron. And this seems to be the thing that is way more correlated to human consciousness and system 2 thinking than anything else. I do think, because what consciousness is, it's a representation of reality that's shifted in terms of abstraction and time. The internal stuff that's going on in your head is time shifted, and it's shifted in terms of an abstraction of the signals. And we are doing that already with AI, but there's no kind of persistence. This would have to be like a capacitor, not a logic gate, which is essentially how it operates right now. And but eventually, I agree, we will figure out some way of doing it. And the thing is, it actually should be the path to solving learning, continuous learning, and system 2 thinking as well. I think over time, and attention. When you hear about attention in models, it doesn't work the same way as human attention. So I think going back to that other one, the big hills to climb from an AI architecture standpoint, like the things I watch for, there really hasn't been a major architectural breakthrough since 2017 with the transformer model. Like all the models we have now are just scaling up the thing we knew from 2017, the 2017 Google paper. But one is we don't really have inhibitory loops in the same way, where you have downstream layers in an artificial neural network inhibiting the firing of upstream. We don't really have those inhibitory loops. We don't have continuous learning. And system 2 we mimic by just passing information through multiple times, but it's not the same, and attention and consciousness are just not the same. So we're further from AGI than I think the AI labs would claim. I think Anthropic is doing all of the right things. They have the right spirit, not in a government relation, they're bungling that, no tomorrow. But I think part of the reason they're bungling that is that Anthropic technically, I think, is extremely smart about how they're handling these things. I think they are running into an administration that's just not technical, right? David Sachs should not be the AI and cyber czar. The guy he's an investor, he doesn't know about the technology. I think that's what's running headlong. You have a bunch of nerds talking to a bunch of people that just are not nerds on this stuff, and that's going to create tension. The thing about Anthropic that I think is short-sighted, though, is they're going down mechanistic interpretability, and I think that's a dead end for the same reasons that the current approaches to neuroscience are a dead end. Believing that if you study all the parts of the circuit, somehow your understanding of the system will emerge. I think that's where Anthropic is missing, but they're hedging by creating a constitution, for example. And I think those are smart ideas. And I think eventually, if any lab is going to get to something that looks more like a Bill of Rights and something like that, and maybe even they do internally, I don't know whether they have something like this internally. I could see Anthropic internally having something like this that says, here's how we're going to treat our models. That seems consistent with how they think about it.
Well, it gives them variety, right?
Yeah.
It gives them options of paths they go down.
And they care a lot about safety and stuff like that. And that is a huge part of who their identity is. And so if anybody is going to go down that path, I would think it would be them. Yeah.
But ethics is only applicable if it follows a model.
The reason I spend zero time thinking about the alignment problem is we can't even get humans on Earth aligned. How the hell are you ever going to align AI to humans, right? And the thing is that humans align in the smallest number possible to perpetuate survival. So in many ways, like all of the divides and things that we have inside the country, like for me, that's a positive because it means you're living in a time of relative peace. Like you combine as groups based on threat. Like the key, if you want world peace, you need an alien invasion. That's how you get world peace. Everybody on Earth will be in harmony. You need an external threat that's big enough to facilitate everybody coming together. So try this alignment problem. By the time you're able to solve the alignment problem, it's too late because AI has become such a big threat to humanity that for humanity to align, you're past the point of no return. You're already screwed. So the alignment problem is, I see zero value in thinking about the alignment problem. But this is where the media thing comes up, which is when air and like physical symbols are your only forms of information sharing, there are limits to how large you can grow a society. When you start moving into writing, now you can connect people across space and time. Then you move to electromechanical or magnetic waves, you can connect people. As your media advances, the minimum viable size of a society increases. But under threat, yes, things will. So let's say that you had peace in the world. I would expect us to revert back to that minimum size. I think as the external threats grow, you start using your media to band together into larger and larger groups to face the threat.
Where is your thought on humanoids, out of curiosity?
Physical robots?
Yeah, when you think about the manual labor, this fuels right into that.
I think it's often equated to the self-driving thing. We thought we were really close, and then it turned out we were way further, but eventually we have gotten to it. I think the thing that is underestimated in robotics is the importance of general models. And I'm going to talk about self-driving. If you think about a self-driving car, it seems like it should be a simple problem to solve, right? You've got a bunch of camera data, you have a bunch of LiDAR sensors, and you only have three inputs. You have gas, brake, and steering angle, three outputs that you need to predict. say that you have a self-driving car driving down the road and there's a deer on the side. Not knowing what a deer is and how a deer behaves and the relationship of deers to cars, that is a really important piece of knowledge that makes you a better driver, that if all you have access to are object recognition and things like that, is just puts you at a disadvantage. And so and you can't ever codify all those edge cases. That's the reason I'm saying that is where we are with the models, the general models getting better and better. If we can get the latency down by distilling them, I think robotics will move way faster than people think, because you are using generalized models to control robots. You're not using these narrow models like when we started out self-driving. So I think actually robotics could go much faster. I think the limitation is hardware. It's actuators, it's sensors. Those are the limitations in
fine motor skill capabilities?
Yeah. It's all of the physical stuff that's hard about robotics. I think the actual mind stuff will happen faster than people think, once you can get the data pipelines.
On the self-driving, can't you automate enough of the edge cases so that it's at least as good as the average human?
It already is,
It's
right?
better, okay.
Yeah, if you just made everybody do a self-driving car now, you would reduce fatalities if you just forced them to. So yeah, it already is better, but the thing is that the thing we're learning, and I mentioned that paper about how the general models are outperforming like open evidence and stuff. There's a thing called the bitter lesson, which is every time you think you can be smarter than just throwing more compute at something, it almost never is true. The answer to everything is just give more compute and more scope. And the reason is all these things are connected in ways that you can't always understand and see, but given more compute, you can find connections. So the example I give is we're gonna, I think at some point in the not too distant future, live in a really weird reality where you'll be like to ChatGPT, I have a headache, and it says, all right, stand on one foot, put your finger in your left ear and drink a cup of orange juice. And your headache goes away and you're like, what the hell? And it's, yeah, I can't explain to you why that works like in words that you could understand, but I knew that would work, right? So I think we're gonna end up with a bunch of things like that where it's beyond our, yes. Yeah. There are going to just be weird things about life like that where it just seems strange about why the model can find these patterns we can't. But keep in mind, the model is harnessing collective human intelligence, right? My whole point about being a media is it is a way of condensing and making accessible all of humanity's intelligence in one place. And we look at it and we're like, this is amazing, but it's because one person has never had access to that. I often ask in the article I'm writing, I have, okay, take one of your ChatGPT prompts and go give it to a Fortune 500 company and give them a week to work on it. Will they come up with an answer that's as good as ChatGPT? Yeah, actually it'll be better. We have superintelligence. We don't have to speculate about what superintelligence looks like. It's collections of people, and what we're doing is we're condensing that down. And it'll just be the bottleneck becomes trust, right? Is prompting, trust, intelligence, and that's what'll.
Friends, let's see if we'll do one more surgery.
Yeah.
I'll write the skill for your surgery, John.
That's me ahead.
Scalpel. I'm here for a knee surgery, though.
Left knee. Did it on the right.
It's also, though, the humanoid one's interesting. Right? I look at that and I think mechanical horse sometimes too, right? You're building literally things that are physically human, but then you think about it, everything around us is built for people, right? It's just a more convenient way of interfacing with the world. We built all this machinery and everything for people. Why wouldn't you? Yeah. Why wouldn't you just build physical machines for it? Yeah.
Anything else, Rob?
That's all I have.
Yeah.
That's fun.
I guess the only thing I'll say is if you guys, we got copies of Rob's book, so feel free to take a copy or two. We got plenty, so if you want to take one for yourself, one for a family member, go right ahead. Thanks for the question. I kind of knew this group wouldn't be shy, and it turned out it's not as shy.
Yeah, I didn't go off the agenda at all. That's great.
No. I would say from a practical standpoint, for those of you guys, Rob's told me for years, just play with it. As many of you are super users, I get that, but those of you that check with custom GPTs or project GPTs or connectors, there's just so many different ways to use it, whether it's Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini. And then you also write on Medium. So he's got a bunch of essays, websites. I don't have anything else to say, but thanks for coming. Thanks for all the questions. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for hosting.
Thanks for doing it.
Putting it together. These are great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we do the dishes?
There you go.
Yeah, I was wondering whether at what point do people give up on authenticity?
Yeah.